Ah, the oven. The quintessential domain of the domestic female. Real barbecue has no place in here, neither do real men. Because if it's not cooked outside over the bones of your enemies, then you're not a real man, and it ain't real barbecue, right? Sorry, I thought that was my wife. Whew. No guys, it's 2020 and it's okay to cook barbecue in the oven. In fact, it's actually a pretty good way to do it. So in this video, I'm gonna use all of my magics, all of my skills and knowledge to show you how to cook the perfect Texas style brisket in an everyday average normal oven. So stick around, let's get smoking. This is a 12-pound USDA choice brisket and it's got a lot of intramuscular fat in it, which is extremely important. If I had to give you guys the most important tip of this video, it's get the highest quality brisket that you can afford. It's okay to get a select grade brisket, that'll work fine, but if you have the money, then definitely spend it on getting a choice or a USDA prime, or if you want to spend a lot of money, get a Wagyu brisket with a ton of fat in it for a really special occasion. So let's look at this choice brisket now and open up this cryovac bag with a knife here. I'm just gonna use the knife side up so I don't slice into the brisket. And I'll pinch it so that I can get somewhere to insert in here. And I'm just gonna slice it all along this side here. All right, there we go. So I'll take this out and my counter's already been disinfected, so I'm just gonna put it directly on my counter. Now what we're looking at is called the fat cap on the top. And this has already been pre-trimmed by my butcher, so usually you'd want to carve quite a bit of this fat off. In fact, it looks like the butcher carved a little bit too much fat off the point than I'd like, so definitely keep a little bit more on the point to protect that point throughout the cook. But the flat is nicely covered with some fat, which is good. And if we flip it over, you can see that there's a ton of intramuscular marbling, all of that fat within these muscle fibers. That tells you that this is gonna be a really good brisket. And if you look at the point muscle here, which is on this side, there's even more fat all inside there. So that's really good. For those of you that don't know, this is called the flat muscle and it runs all the way over here and underneath this point. And you can actually see where the two muscles connect on this particular brisket. And this is called the point muscle here, which sits on top of the flat. These are different muscles. Usually this one cooks a lot slower than the flat because the flat is thinner. And usually the point is a lot more tender. This is where we typically get our slices from, and then this is where you can also get your slices from, but you can also make burnt ends. If you guys want a full tutorial about how to trim a brisket properly, then check out that link in the top right of your screen. That video is gonna tell you everything you need to know to trim a full packer brisket, which is what this is. This is a packer brisket because it has both the point muscle and the flat muscle attached. Now, there's a little bit of prep work to do before we put this brisket in the oven. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna brine it in a solution of water and some curing salts. So I've got some Morton Tender Quick here, and this has some sodium nitrite and sodium nitrate in it. I'm going to put this in a brine solution and soak the brisket in it for about 2 hours, and that is going to create what's called the smoke ring. Now the smoke ring is the thin pink layer on the outside of the meat when you cut into it, and it just screams barbecue. You look at it and it's that nice thin pink smoke ring on the outside of the meat. We've got nice black bark, and that's what we're going for because we want to get as close to the authentic Texas style brisket as possible in the oven. The problem with the oven is that it doesn't produce any smoke or flame, and it doesn't create the chemical reaction that you need to make that pink smoke ring. So that's why we got to cheat and use this little hack or trick in order to get that pink smoke ring on the outside. So I'm gonna mix 1/4 cup of this Morton's Tender Quick with 1 gallon of water, and then I'm gonna submerge this brisket into this metal pot here. If you have a brine bag, it's a lot easier, but I'm just gonna use a heavy pot just to press it down and make sure that it's fully submerged. So now I'm gonna leave this to brine at room temperature for 2 hours. It's okay to leave it at room temperature because I just took this brisket out of the fridge and we want to bring it up in temperature a little bit anyway before we put it in the oven. That's going to speed up the cooking process, so it's more than okay to leave this thing at room temperature on the counter. In fact, this thing to come up to room temperature would probably take 6 to 7 hours, so don't worry about food safety issues because this thing is going to retain that cold even at room temperature for a long time. So let's leave this and come back in 2 hours. All right, it's been about 2 hours now, and we're gonna take this brisket out of the brine solution. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna rinse off this brine because we don't want those nitrites to continue to do their work while the brisket's cooking, we want to make sure we're stopping the process because that smoke ring is probably already formed on the inside of this from the nitrites. So I'll take this to the sink and I'll rinse it off and I'll be right back. Now the next phase is to prepare your rub. So for this recipe, I'm going to use some black pepper, coarse ground. I'm going to use some kosher salt, very coarse grained salt that matches up nicely with the grain of this coarse black pepper. And secret ingredient, this is trick number 2 to getting an authentic looking Texas style brisket. This is charcoal powder. It's food grade charcoal powder. And people use it to whiten their teeth. They use it to detoxify and put it in drinks. So it's safe to consume in small quantities. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a teaspoon of it into our rub to add a nice black looking bark texture to the outside. Because it's really hard to get black bark in the oven because you're not producing smoke and fire. So that's why we're getting a little help from this charcoal powder just to add a little bit of that black color. So let's mix this up now. I have my handy little shaker bottle here, and we're going to mix 1/3 cup of coarse black pepper into our shaker. And we'll do 1/3 cup of our kosher salt. So half and half. There we go. And now I'm going to add a teaspoon of our charcoal powder. It doesn't need a lot of this charcoal powder. It goes a long way. So I'll do a heaping teaspoon. And we'll just put that in. Now I'm going to tighten this up. And I'll just give it a shake. And as you can see, it's getting really black already. You don't need a lot of that charcoal powder to go a long way. All right, so we've got our rub ready to go. Gonna clean that up a little bit. And now we're gonna pat dry our brisket because we're gonna be using something else as a binding agent, so we don't want a ton of water on this brisket. So we'll just give that a pat. Give it a little bit of massage, a little shiatsu. There we go. So you'll notice that the brisket is now top side down. So the fat cap is on the bottom and the bottom is facing me. And this is important because we want to prep the bottom first because this isn't the presentation side. You don't want to be in a situation where you're prepping the top first and then you flip the top onto the cutting board and ruin that nice consistency of the rub you just applied and then have to flip it over again. So that's why we're doing it this way. And now we're going to talk about the third trick that we're going to use to get an authentic Texas style brisket in the oven. We're going to use some liquid smoke. Now this is Colgan liquid smoke. It is natural hickory. You can use any type of flavor you want of wood. So you could use mesquite, you could use apple. I like hickory because it's got a good flavor and I use it on all my barbecue. So we're going to apply this to the outside of the brisket as a binder. So we're adding the liquid on and rubbing it in. And as I said, this is going to act as a binder for when we put our rub on, and it's going to help it stick to the brisket more. It's also going to add that nice smoke flavor. It's going to seep into all those muscle fibers. It's going to be tasty. All right, now we're going to apply our rub. So we'll just go pretty high up so we can get an even consistency, and we'll just go nice and easy back and forth. You can really apply a lot of rub to this brisket because it's a big piece of meat and it can take all that salt and that pepper because you're only gonna get a little thin piece of bark on each slice. So don't worry about over spicing it. You can pretty much put as much spice or rub on the outside of this thing as you want, and it's not gonna be too salty. Usually I don't pat my rub very much when I'm doing barbecue, but in this case, it really helps the charcoal to even out and dissolve into that liquid smoke. So I like to kind of rub it in a little bit. And you can see already that just from me patting it down, that charcoal is now dissolving with the moisture that's on the brisket, and it's making that nice black consistency and color. All right, let's flip this guy over. Oh, it's a heavy boy. That's a big boy. All right, and now we'll start doing our presentation side. So this is the side that is going to be facing up in the oven, so we want it to look nice and pretty. So we'll try to be a bit more careful on this side and be a bit more even with how we're doing our rub. And I like to do a couple passes from up high because I find that it just results in a much evener consistency. All right, there we go. Now again, I'm just lightly patting this side. I don't want to mess the bark up too much. Just want to make sure that charcoal powder is getting evenly distributed. It's getting sucked up in that liquid smoke. All right, this brisket is rubbed. Nice and simple recipe, salt, pepper, keeping it simple. I'm a simple guy. Actually, I'm not really, I tend to overthink everything, but there's charcoal powder in here as well to add a little bit of color, and it looks great. It almost looks like it's finished and we haven't even put it in the oven. So now we're gonna set our oven to 275 degrees Fahrenheit. We're gonna put our brisket in the middle rack of the oven over top of a pan just to catch the drippings. And we're gonna put it on a rack so that we get some more airflow and heat underneath the brisket so it cooks more evenly and faster. We're gonna cook this for 4 to 6 hours until the internal temperature comes up to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. When it hits 165 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when you wanna take it out of the oven and you move on to the next step. All right, guys, so we're sitting at around 165 degrees Fahrenheit, and this is my pug, Reggie. He's just ruining my shot. That's great. Hey, buddy, you want some brisket? You want some brisket? Yes, I do. Yes, I know you do. You want some brisket? Get out of here. Now, I just checked the temperature in this brisket, and we're sitting at 165 degrees Fahrenheit. We just got past the stall. It's lost a lot of moisture, but the bark is looking good. So let's take a look at this now. There we go. Nice. So pull this out a little bit. All right, so you can see that there's a nice bark forming. You can see that in this divot on the flat has actually started to curl up a little bit here, and the water is starting to pool right here, and that's perfect. That's a good sign because it tells you that you're in the stall and you're probably just getting past the stall right now because the rest of the brisket's looking pretty dry, and this is kind of the last holdout of moisture. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna drip this onto the pan below just to get it off. There we go. And now I'm gonna take this out and I'm gonna put it on the counter. At this point, we're gonna wrap the brisket in butcher's paper, and this does two things. It retains moisture within the brisket, and it also helps it to cook faster. So if you just go the whole oven cook without wrapping it, you risk getting a pretty dry brisket. So let's wrap this up now. This is the way that I do it. Just put that to the side for now. We'll get a section of the butcher's paper, put it like that, and we'll get another section, put it in the middle, and one more. There we go. So I'll put this in the middle of these two here. So it's all overlapping. And now the brisket is going to lie right here so that when we fold it up, it's going to create a bowl for all of that moisture to soak into so it doesn't lose all of that moisture that's coming out of the brisket. So let's move this over here. And now we're going to start from this end. And you can kind of press down on it gently, and that's gonna keep the butcher paper in place because all that moisture in the brisket is gonna really hold it in place after it soaks into the butcher paper. So we'll do another V shape here. And then I'll pull this up. And put that underneath. So there we go, it's wrapped in butcher's paper, and now I'm gonna put it inside of a large aluminum foil pan because this thing is still gonna lose a lot of moisture, so you don't wanna put it in your oven without anything to catch the drippings underneath it. So let's transfer this to the pan. And now this goes back in the oven. We're gonna crank the heat up to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're coming up 50 degrees Fahrenheit because now that it's wrapped in the butcher's paper, it can handle a lot more heat and we want this thing to cook faster. So let's crank the temperature up to 325. When the internal temperature of the point muscle, the largest part of the brisket, according to your leave-in thermometer, reads about 195 to 203 degrees Fahrenheit, then that means your brisket is probably done, but we're gonna go through a couple of tests before we know that it's actually done. So let's get this in the oven. It's gonna need a few more hours, probably 2 to 3 more hours until it reaches that temperature zone. So we'll check back on it in a few hours. Now, while we're waiting for the brisket to finish, I'm gonna make a simple jus using all of the drippings that came off of the brisket into the pan. Really easy to make. All you do is you just put your burners on low here. And we'll dump a little bit of clean water onto this pan. And we're just deglazing all of that fond or juices that's dripped down and baked onto the bottom of this pan. All you gotta do is heat up the water a little bit, scrape it with a wooden spoon here, and eventually it'll all come off and it'll mix into a nice mixture. And this is really gonna elevate your brisket. It's gonna add a ton of flavor. It's gonna reclaim all of those juices that this brisket lost during the cooking process. And a lot of those juices that drip onto the bottom of the pan are really tasty. All right, there we go. So now we're gonna transfer this onto a pot here. Make sure we scoop up all that deliciousness. And the final phase is we just need to strain this into a bowl to get rid of those large chunkies in there. And there's our simple jus from brisket drippings. All right, guys, we just took this brisket out of the oven. It has hit an internal temperature of 203 degrees Fahrenheit. I've done a couple tests to ensure that it's done. The first one is you wanna get your fingers under it. Gloved hands are good, something that is not permeable. So what I like to do is usually I put latex gloves on and then I put cotton gloves underneath it to protect my hands from burns. Can't get latex gloves right now due to the global health pandemic, so I'm just using these grill heat aid gloves. But you can put your hands underneath and you can test for doneness by lifting it up. If it wants to bend over itself and it's really wobbly, is the only way I can describe it, then that's the first test complete. The second test is the temperature test. You wanna make sure it reaches around 195 to 203 degrees Fahrenheit. I went all the way to 203 in this cook because this is a pretty thick brisket. The third test to ensure that it's done is you wanna poke it and probe it to make sure it's tender. It should feel like you're inserting the probe into like a bag of butter. There's no resistance involved. So when I put the probe into the point muscle, you can barely feel any resistance, which means that it's done. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna leave it to rest at room temperature for about 2 hours, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna slice into it. Very important that you let it rest because the meat needs a chance to reabsorb all those juices. Otherwise, if you cut into it, all those juices are gonna shoot out and it's gonna be really dry. So make sure that you rest for at least 2 hours. All right, it's been 2 hours, so it's time to cut into this thing, and I'm really excited about this because this is gonna be good. So we'll take this temperature probe out, put that to the side. We'll open up the butcher's paper. This is my favorite part. It's like unwrapping a Christmas present. Oh man, look at this. Still steam coming off of it. Lots of juices soaking into the butcher paper. Whew. Look at that bark though. Wow. That looks amazing. Dang, that looks good. All right, let's dig into this thing. See if I can lift it out here. Set this guy down. Wow. That is looking nice. All right, guys, I'll give you a close-up of this brisket. You can see that awesome smoke ring, nice pink smoke ring all along the outside. We got that from brining it in the sodium nitrate solution, the Morton's Tender Quick, for 2 hours before we did anything. We got a nice black bark on the outside. The charcoal powder has helped a lot with that coloring, but we've also formed some nice bark and crispiness in the oven as well. So this is looking nice. We're nice and juicy. If you squish it, you can see all those juices coming out. It's beautiful. That is great. All right, let's keep cutting into this. I'm gonna slice it into 1/4 inch thick slices. Oh, wow, that looks good. And as I'm doing this, you're exposing the brisket to the air and it starts to oxidize. You can see this one has been exposed to the air for a little bit and it's actually turning brown and oxidizing. So what I like to do is I take the jus that we prepared and I like to spread it onto the exposed surface of the brisket as I'm slicing it. And this also serves as a little bit of added moisture, which is good. And it's just gonna make it a heck of a lot tastier. Look at how tender that is. That's really nice. I'm gonna take a bite of this. Let's go from this side here. Yeah, nice smoke ring, nice bark on this. That's how I like it. Mmm. Oh man, so good. Pulls apart super easily. You can see that it's like nothing. There's no resistance to it. Give you a better shot. Just pulls apart like nothing. That means it's perfectly cooked. I'm really happy how this turned out. And guys, if you're looking for another video about how to cook a brisket in an actual smoker, then you should check this video out in the top left-hand corner. That's gonna tell you how to cook a brisket in a masterbuilt electric smoker. If you don't have a smoker yet, highly recommend you get one. It's your destiny and you need to get one. So check out this video, that's gonna inspire you, and see you in that video. Because if it's not cooked over the bones of your enemy outside, nope, needs more time.